Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Avoid Extinction. Go digital before it's too late. The crawl, walk, run approach to introducing digital tools. First, let's start off by introducing today's presenter, Josh Gervin. He's O3's CEO. He's got tons of AWP and construction leadership experience. He serves on many different committees as chair and founder. And then he's a former SVP of product and market strategy for materials management software. He's got 12 technology patents and a BSc mechanical engineering from Princeton. So real quick, let's do a safety moment. And as spring is approaching or is already here for some areas, we've got some seasonal allergy tips for you. So a couple things to keep in mind. Always know what you're allergic to and just avoid those triggers. That's a pretty obvious one to go ahead and take into consideration. And then when pollen counts are high, just probably avoid outdoors. And then also keep your indoor air clean. You can always try an over-the-counter remedy. Oral antihistamines, decongestants, nasal sprays are always helpful. And you can rinse your sinuses. And when none of the above work, you can always go see your doctor. So with that, we'll go into our agenda. So today's goal is to share O3's view of digital transformation and how it relates to an organization's AWP journey. And first, we'll introduce a little bit about us, and then we'll go into digital transformation, and then Digitalization Solutions, AWP journey, key takeaways, and then at the very end, we'll have time for a Q&A. So with that in mind, please submit your questions in the GoToWebinar panel, and we will get to those towards the end. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Josh Gervin. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Josh.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tori. I'd like to start out with just a little bit of an introduction on O3. So who is O3? O3 is a modern web-based or SaaS platform that's built on advanced work packaging and agile best practices, specifically for the construction space. So we are a software company. It is a project management solution, and it builds in agile project management and advanced work packaging best practices to provide a modern project management solution. It is the industry's most trusted AWP software. We've got implementations on some of the world's largest projects with thousands of users across 50 or 60 different organizations collaborating to deliver a mega project, as well as managing portfolios of small cap projects with hundreds of small projects at an existing facility that are being managed through the solution. So from the smallest projects to the largest projects, O3, like AWP and Agile Project Management, digital project management, is highly scalable. Some of the things that set O3 apart from some of the more antiquated solutions in the market. First and foremost, it's a single modern platform, so it is delivered over the web. There is no thick client required even for doing graphical work packaging, for example, or status visualization within the tool. It's not a older, thick client type approach. It's a modern web delivered solution. And from the very beginning, it was designed as a project management solution to cover the entire life cycle of a project. And so what that means is that it's not a platform technology that was cobbled together through the acquisition of multiple solutions that were then duct taped together to try to provide a complete solution. O3 had the advantage from the very beginning of being designed with the end in mind, understanding that it needed to be a complete solution across the entire project life cycle to be a true project management solution. And another thing that goes in hand with that is its work packaging capabilities that go across the entire life cycle, and we'll talk more about that. But most people, when they think about work packaging, think about things like installation work packages. O3 has 10 work package types across the entire project life cycle, and it's not just about identifying those packages and then statusing them. There's actual workflows and configurations and automation that allow you to do this digitalization, and we'll talk more about that. Another key piece is it's highly scalable, so it works on these very large projects with complex contract strategies with organizations, 50 or 60 different organizations with different contractual rights on the project and therefore access to different information inside the tool. as well as scaling down to small cap projects as we discussed. And then the thing that really sets us apart from the kind of antiquated dinosaur solution providers in this space is that we are an agile solution provider ourselves. We follow agile development practices internally. We use Scrum, and we do a production release every 2 weeks. So we're not one new release of the software every year or 2 years like you see from a lot of the providers. It's a new production release every 2 weeks, which means that we're constantly innovating. So we're ahead of the pack, and we're innovating faster than the other providers in the space. So a little bit about O3 and what sets us apart. It makes us different in this space. Now to talk about digital transformation. In order to go through that and understand how O3 views digital transformation, I want to go over a couple of key terms. The first is digitization versus digitalization. So that's a mouthful, but these are actually mean different things. So digitization is the process of making information or data accessible in a digital format. So you can think about taking a paper or an analog process and moving that paper process into a digital world, but still following that same process. That's digitization. When you go to digitalization, that means that, hey, you're taking advantage of the fact that you're operating within technology, and now you can start to actually optimize that process to be done in a digital environment. So instead of taking paper process, moving to digital process of that same paper process, now you can do things and say, hey, now that we have this technology, how can we do this differently? How can we optimize our approach to fully leverage that technology? And then digital transformation, that's the process of devising these new business applications that integrate all of these digitized data and digitalized applications. So the transformation process is converting your organization to be leveraging new applications, solving new problems, leveraging the digitization and digitalization that you've done. That's a mouthful, but some things to keep in mind as we go through this. So now from a polling perspective, we'd like to ask the audience a couple of questions. And if you could go to your poll here, you can see that in your go-to box there. So if you can go ahead and answer this, but how would you describe your company's efforts to go digital in project execution? Still using a mix of some manual processes and some digital, moving all manual processes to a digital process, or moving beyond just digital processes to full automation and workflows. So where do you see your organization today? All right. And Tori, can you see those results coming in?
Yes. So the top result was still using a mix of some manual processes.
So not surprised to see that. That is often what we see. And what we find is organizations often think, hey, we've got this initiative internally. We are working towards this goal. But in reality, what we find is a lot of organizations, all project execution, we find some manual processes. We see some paper processes. So now thinking about this of the overall state of the industry, if we think about digital transformations, folks that were involved in this from a bleeding edge perspective, those are people that had initiatives on this and see meaningful progress before the 2015 timeframe. This is our view and sort of specific to this industry. Other industries made this transformation years ago, or in some cases decades ago. But bleeding edge is this having this transformation in place and in earnest before 2015. Leading edge has been 2015 to 2020, but it's underway. The on-time portion of the market, or the kind of late majority, is in the 20 to 25, and then the laggards are the folks that are going to get outpaced and can fall behind if they don't have this process in place. This is O3's view based off of our experience and where we see the market and those people who have digital transformation initiatives. So another poll, interested in seeing what people think, where they think their organization is from a digital transformation perspective. And we're mostly talking about project execution here, so not the back office side of your organization, but the project execution group and set of tools there. Have you transformed digitally? Would you say your organization was bleeding edge or leading edge or coming in on time, or is at risk at being left behind? So take a second and just let us know what you think about your organization. And then Tori, after we get some of that feedback, if you could just let me know what we're seeing.
Yep, looks like almost everybody has voted here. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Okay, close that. So Josh, the results were 25% bleeding, 33% leading, 8% right on time, and then 33% left behind.
That's interesting. I think that's there's a group that's aware that that they are behind, which is good. And I think what we tend to find is that organizations that are larger and that have more R&D dollars to put towards their digital transformation process, like super majors, for example, we find that they all have a digital transformation initiative that's a spotlight initiative or a lighthouse or a CEO level visibility initiative within their organizations. So not surprised, but we tend to see this breakdown based off of the size of the organization in our experience. Although that's a general statement, that's not 100% accurate, obviously. So, okay, great. So that's good, and I appreciate that feedback. So now we're going to talk a little bit about digitalization solutions and some of the challenges that we've seen with implementation of digitalization solutions and project management solutions. Now, again, when we talk about digitalization, we're not just taking a manual process and putting that in a digital world. We're thinking about how do we optimize that process and take advantage of technology for automation. When we think about implementing this, obviously, we're going to take out the back office side of the organizations and talk about just project execution. Within project execution, there are lots of distinctions that make projects different. And is it lump sum? Is it an EP? What's the contract strategy? How's the setup? What's the type of project? There's a lot of factors that go into impacting the technology and the process on the project. We're going to just look at it from two large buckets of small cap projects versus large cap projects. And what we see on the small cap side, some of the challenges is you have the resources are spread thin across multiple simultaneous projects. You've got project managers or project engineers that are in charge of sometimes 10 projects at the same time. And the processes and the technologies that are used and the resources are super ingrained, right? You have a group of people that maybe the average duration that they've been there is over a decade. They've been executing projects the same way. And so you have a more ingrained process as opposed to when you come together for a greenfield project and you sort of have a chance to decide how is that project going to be executed? What's the tech stack going to look like based off of the different resources and organizations that are involved? And so you often have few or no digital tools in place to build from. You may have P6 and some scheduling, but you've got a lot of Excel, you've got a lot of email, you've got a lot of basic Outlook type, Microsoft type tools to support that. On the large cap side, you tend to have more sophisticated technologies. You tend to have organizations that have a complex internal ecosystem for their project execution, but where you run into challenges is on the interfaces. Now you've got multiple sets of sophisticated technology ecosystems that don't necessarily work well together, and they're often actually designed in a way where they don't kind of play well with each other. We have a lot of clients who have brought O3 in to help when they've run into challenges where they don't have interoperability between, say, an engineering authoring tool and their virtual construction tool because they came from different solution providers. So the outcome here is that the projects fall back to Excel to enable basic exchange of data across stakeholders. So when you get into these interfaces, that's where you start to have challenges. So the challenges are different, but at the end of the day, you end up having a lot of manual or barely digitized processes like Excel. So you're not getting digitalization, you're not getting true process optimization, you're getting a digital approach to a paper-based or inefficient process. So from our perspective, the solution for that is this single integrated collaboration tool for managing the actions and workflows across the project participants. And so when we think about when you have to execute a project, there's a bunch of activities that need to be done, a bunch of tasks, a bunch of assignments, a bunch of approvals, a bunch of constraints, a bunch of things that need to be managed. And right now, those either live in basic tools like Excel or email, or there aren't solutions for those, or you have to interface across project participants and you end up breaking down and falling back to things like Excel. So having a solution that can connect all these things together and give you this holistic view of all the activities and their context and how they're interrelated is really powerful. And so what do we mean when we talk about the different actions or activities? Well, one that we often see implemented from O3 is the RFI management side. On small cap projects, we find that the RFI module replaces an email or Excel-based exchange that's riddled with inefficiency. And then on large cap projects, we find that different organizations often have their own tools for managing RFIs, but they don't talk well to each other. And there's no kind of single centralized location where you can see that RFI and view it in the context of all the other activities and what work that's holding up, and the predecessor and successor relationships to that activity and those actions and approvals that need to happen with that. So from O3's perspective, regardless of whether that RFI originates in O3 or another tool that's walled off and only accessible to some of the project participants, there needs to be this central location and central environment where all of that actions and activities come together. And you can then replace this manual chase up and phone and email with automations and workflow. That's where you get into this digitalization, where you actually start to improve your process. Another area we see is constraint management. Most people think of constraint management being related to installation work packages, but within O3, the constraint module applies to all of our entities. That's across all our work packages, but it's also things like purchase orders and requisitions and mechanical equipment and vendor data. There's other activities and other things that need to be managed that have constraints against them. So being able to have all these constraints tracked and managed in one place. Now, again, it doesn't have to necessarily originate in O3. A constraint could be automatically created because you have a status change in a drawing management system, or you have a change in a materials management system. So you can automatically create and clear constraints, but you want all of those to be visible in one place so you have a holistic view of what needs to be done to successfully deliver the project, which today doesn't exist on most projects. Another a key action is approvals. Again, the approvals don't necessarily have to originate in O3, but O3 has a significant amount of business logic built in to automatically create approvals and automatically create constraints, assign those approvals to people, route those through a workflow based off of the status of the work and the activities that are being executed in, within the project management solution. And what does that mean? It means that you can now apply approvals. One, you can apply them more broadly because they don't have an extreme inefficiency associated with them, because now you're routing it, someone gets notified they have approval, they can click, they can then, 2 clicks and they can approve that. There's a much more efficient process. But it also means that because now it's not a digitized process, it's not a manual process that we've just taken and made it digital, we've actually added the business logic and the configurability and the workflows to allow you to make approval flows that are specific to the type of work that's being done, who's doing it. Some contractors may require approval, others don't. You have the ability to control and configure based off of what work's being done, who's doing it, when it's being done, the status of that work, to adjust the approvals that are required for that. So that's where you start to get into the real automation, the real value of that digitalization process. Another example is on the risk side. So risk management, most projects treat risk management as a check the box activity, right? You've got an Excel sheet or some basic tool, you check the box, you fill that in at every stage gate, and then you don't look at it again until the next stage gate. That's the reality. That's what we see on a lot of projects. What O3 does is O3 says, no, risks should be part of your project management. Those are activities. The risk itself is an entity that needs to be managed. There are tasks and activities that you need to do to reduce the likelihood of that risk becoming an issue. If that risk becomes an issue, there are activities that you need to take to mitigate the impact of that issue so you can proactively reduce that impact. Right? So there's a lot of activities and actions and tasks that all then need to be routed and managed. And so if you treat risks as an actual project management entity that's within your project management tool that's connected to these other entities, so the risks can be associated with specific work scopes or with specific contractors or specific things within the tool, by connecting those and tightly coupling them, then you can actually proactively manage risks and not treat it as just a check the box activity. Another area where we see a lot of use is on the document review side. What we find here is that we see typically a document-centric exchange. So if you want to review a document, you make documents, you issue that document out, they review it, they send comments back, and there's a very inefficient back and forth with multiple document management systems involved. What O3 allows you to do is to pull up that document, view that document, annotate, make notes on that document, automatically create constraints associated with that, or RFIs associated with that, or requirements for an approval associated with that. But you can automatically, through that process, trigger and create those other actions that need to be done, and then have those automatically assigned to the resources necessary to complete those. So you're constantly driving the activity as opposed to a very slow back and forth. Now the system is driving that activity and driving you towards actual completion of the work. And then all of these activities, all of these actions, all of these tasks need to be managed. And what O3 does is it allows you to take those and then organize all those actions, all those activities, and organize them into what we call team boards. But you can think of a team board as just whatever perspective that you want. So it's a way where you can create a board for just yourself. You can create a board for your team. You can create a board for your role. You can create a board for any random group of individuals, and you can have an infinite number of these boards. And then each of these tasks can live on multiple boards. So this task may live on my board that I use to manage my own work. It may also live on my constraint review meeting board, or it might live in my approval review meeting board, or my construction work package release board, or my IWP planning and sequencing board. I can have different boards for different meetings, or my path of construction board. I can have different boards for different meetings or activities or teams, and then I can organize so that all the actions associated with that team. So now I'm scoping the actions and activities with a specific team, giving a view, a perspective for that team that allows us then to manage those activities and on the fly create new tasks as necessary. Oh, wait, I need a subtask to that one. Or, oh, wait, that reminds me I need to add this activity or this task. So now I have a means of organizing those tasks and activities that are drive, again, even more efficient activities. So even when the computer can't automate it and we need a human interaction, we organize that data in a way that enables those teams to be as efficient as possible for that meeting or that team. It's scoped to specifically what they're working on. So that's a really important aspect of what O3 does and helps you to manage those activities. So, and to kind of frame that together, the way that O3 thinks about this is that we provide this base action management layer that goes across all the tools to ensure that you have collaboration and accountability. So you may have multiple systems. You may have contractor RFI systems and owner RFI systems and EPC RFI systems, but we can pull all that information together into a web platform everybody can access. You can control access based off of your contract strategy so that certain contractors can't see other contractors' data, or owner can see certain data and EPC can see certain data. You have controls around that, but it gets all those actions in one place. So now you can have a meaningful environment for actual collaboration. If you don't have visibility into these activities, you can't have accountability. And if you don't have a shared space where people can go in from different organizations and different stakeholders, you can't have collaboration. This is a base requirement if you want to have a digitalized project execution strategy. You have to have a combined environment for all of these activities. It's a base requirement for a true digitalized project delivery. So what does this mean from an AWP perspective? Because while O3 is used as a project execution tool where Workface Planning and AWP aren't used, most of the folks are familiar with O3 as being a market leader in the AWP space. So while we do have clients who don't do Workface Planning or AWP and are using it as a digitalized project execution, project management tool, there is obviously a tight relationship between this digitalization journey and the AWP journey. And the reality is that AWP is enabled by digitalization. So it's technically true that you can do AWP manually, but there are limitations. You can do it on a small scale. There's less efficiency associated with it. If you do it manually, you do get gains. A better planning process will make you realize some gains, but the reality is that in order to truly mine the value, you have to pair that with technology. So you can get some additional value by digitizing that manual process. So I can take a manual planning process and then I can digitize that so I can move that into a computer environment. but I haven't really changed my process. But the real value comes from the digitalization and the unlocking of these workflows and automation. So one example is on the Workface Planning side. If I'm scoping an installation work package, I'm going through my 3D model and I'm grabbing components to add to my package. If your model is sufficiently attributed, then we can do a lot of automation. We can pull in the bill of materials, we can pull in the drawings, we can pull in information, we can pull in unit rates and quantities. We can do all kinds of calculations. We can automatically create all the execution steps necessary to complete that work in the field. There's a lot of automation that can happen when you have appropriate attribution. Then you can take advantage of a tool like O3 that allows you to have a really powerful business logic layer of configuration that then automatically spawns all that activity. So in order to really capture the value, to really get to automation and get to that step change in productivity, you have to have a solution that combines both that better planning that you get through an AWP process, but then allows you to see that activity through to fruition, that drives those users to action and takes advantage of that automation. These digitalized solutions are the foundation upon which better process can be built. If you think about a manual process where you say, hey, I want to make a process change, well, now I got to print a new form, I got to go train people on this new form, right? And then I got to, the manual process change is far more challenging than it once you move into this digitalized environment. So for example, if you add another data attribute, I can turn on another automation within O3, and now all of a sudden I am automatically creating execution steps when I wasn't before, or now I'm automatically pulling and drawing data when I wasn't before. Right, so you're now talking about process enhancements and improvements that come in the form of configuration within the tool. That's hugely powerful, right? If I can unlock value through a few keystrokes, right? I can change process, I can optimize it, I can tweak it. That's in a whole different ballgame than when I'm living in a manual world, right? When I graduate out of the manual world and I come into a digitalized world, now I can make process improvements with configuration. And that's the foundation, that's the base layer upon which true process enhancement can be built. And so O3 takes this approach. We combine this disciplined planning approach at AWP with that workflow automation, and you can only get that from a purpose-built digitalized solution, right? And O3 is purpose-built around this and is a market leader. So what does that mean? So how do I go about what does this mean for my AWP journey? What that means is that from a crawl, walk, run perspective, the first step is to go digital. You got to move some of these manual processes to digital, right? And then once you've done that, you can begin to include components of Workface Planning. And then as you learn, you can start to increase that, right? You can start to increase that maturity. You can start to do more, right? You can unlock, you can turn on additional features and additional configuration to say, okay, first, I'm going to do Workface Planning. It's going to be a smaller scope. It's going to be only these pieces. And then I can expand the scope and I can turn on more and more components. I can turn on more and more packages. I can expand that out even into AWP, other disciplines, and enhanced capabilities. So there's this stepped approach that we take with folks, and it's a very effective way to have these two journeys happen in parallel. The one thing that we have learned and we think is worth noting here is that when you're talking about applying this to small cap brownfield projects at an existing facility, that you really, because of some of the specifics of how these places operate, the AWP component, the maturity of AWP can be increased incrementally over time. That can be a journey. Turning on the digitalization, that really needs to be more of a binary approach. So what we mean by that is you need to get the tool in place for the base digital project action management layer, and then you can turn on additional Workface Planning and additional AWP maturity over time, and you can increase that. The reason you want to do that is because when you try to do the rollout of just partial technology, you run into some challenges where the resources are executing in multiple projects simultaneously. So you're going to be asking them to be doing different processes and using different technologies, and there's some real challenges associated with that. So we did a case study here internally. We compared the outcomes of two different scalable AWP rollouts. So this is looking at one where we said, hey, we're going to identify a pilot project. We're going to do AWP and the technology at the same time. Then within that PM, we're going to expand to more of their projects. One of the challenges there, like I mentioned, is requiring the PMs to work across these multiple tools and processes, and so that slows the rollout, both of the adoption of the technology, but even more importantly, the adoption of the better process is slowed as a result of that. We look at a different client, or excuse me, a different implementation, actually same client, different implementation. We digitalized the processes in the beginning across all the projects. So said, hey, here's a tool, it's solving one of your existing problems. You can digitize this existing process and then enhance that. You can add some automation, some notifications. So everybody's logging into the tool and getting value. And then you can incrementally increase the AWP maturity over time as projects roll in and roll out. But then you're building off of this base as opposed to having people operating in multiple systems. That introduces a barrier to that. So what does that look like from functionality perspective? We talked about the digital solutions, RFIs and constraints and risks. We talk about those kind of core tasks that need to be managed. When you move from there, you get into Workface Planning. That's where you get into 3D and 4D model integration, schedule alignment, status visualization, various work package types. And then you can expand from there into full AWP, and that's where you get into work packages earlier and later in the process. So we went through these in more detail, so I won't rehash these, but the base here is that you want to take some of these existing processes that use a lot of Excel or use a lot of emails or use a lot of other kind of non-purpose-built solutions, or you have purpose-built solutions across stakeholders that don't talk to each other. You want to pull that information into a base project management action management tool where you have all of these various types of actions and activities, and now you can have a holistic view of the actions and tasks necessary to actually get the job done. From a Workface Planning perspective, consuming the 3D model, one of the kind of core differentiators of O3 is that we can consume a 3D model authored by really any engineering authoring tool. So we don't have the same challenges or limitations that you find in some of the older technologies, the thick client technologies that can't support modern model types, file types. In addition to the consuming of the model and scoping the packages, you can do the CDP release management, IDP management. Again, these are workflow management process. So there's automation in terms of the creation of the package. Then there's a workflow that you move that through, automation of how that status moves and creates different approvals or constraints or activities as it moves through that workflow. All that can be configured and defined based off of the type of package or who's executing that package, the contract strategy. All those things can be configured so that these packages move through these workflows and you actually drive the users to action. And it's important to remember, people are hearing, oh, it's lots of configuration. Within O3, all that configuration can be saved as a project template and reused. So you start with a project template of, oh, this is what my small cap projects look like. And then every time I spin up a project, I start with that and all those configurations are inherited. And then I can just tweak from there. So O3 puts a lot of thought into not having that be a burden and having our clients be able to be self-sufficient. 4D planning and playback. So that's where you can add the element of time, so we can consume data from a scheduling tool like P6, or you can actually put that data in yourself in a sequencing process. So we can align with that schedule. You can do scaffolded planning and management, and then additional work package types beyond just the CWPs and IDPs, like test work packages, for example. All right, and then AWP tools, AWP Master Index. So this is the core backbone, a database of all the packages on the project. So across all stakeholders, across all package types, across all disciplines, across all organizations, that master index has to live somewhere. You have to know the complete set of packages. There has to be at least one tool that knows that and then can communicate with the other solutions. And that is what O3 does. So we do that from the AWP Master Index perspective, and we do that from that base action layer perspective as well. Vendor data management, and additional work package types when you start to get into engineering work packages, design, vendor work packages, procurement work packages, and then later in the project lifecycle, things into startup and commissioning with like turnover packages, for example. So O3 obviously provides the Workface Planning and AWP tools, market leader in that space. But the primary thing that we wanted to make sure people were aware of today is that there's also all these digitalized project management tools within O3 that help you to add value beyond just Workface Planning and AWP, but by coupling those things together. So now we have better planning and sequencing that comes with AWP and WFP, and then we have the ability to manage all of the associated activities, actions, and tasks necessary to get that work done. Those two things coming together, better planning and then facilitated execution, those combine to give you that true productivity gain that O3 provides. So covered a lot today, talking quickly, have some couple of key takeaways that I want to share before we get into the Q&A session. First, there is a distinction between digitized, digitalized, and digital transformation. So remember, digitized is taking a manual process and putting it into a digital format. Digitalized is saying, hey, I have technology in place now I can better this process. And digital transformation is saying, okay, now I can think about new business processes because I've got my underlying pieces at least in a digital format, but ideally in a digitalized format. And that transformation is a journey. The other thing to keep in mind is that this digitalized foundation, having this technology in place, having this workflow and task and action management and configurable automation tool, this enables that better process. When you can get to enhancing and tweaking a process through configuration, that allows you to cycle through your process and tweak and enhance it much faster than when you're living in this manual world. AWP rollout requires a digitalized rollout, and I know some people will say, oh, AWP is a process. The reality is AWP is a process, but to truly get the value out of it, you have to have technology. That is O3's opinion. It's my opinion. It is a fact that in order to maximize the value of AWP, you need technology that enables that. And this is particularly true when you're talking about the rollout at scale of AWP. We went through a comparison there, case study. We found the adoption of AWP was significantly increased. The rate of AWP maturity adoption was significantly increased when we first did just a digitalized project management rollout, and then added incremental AWP maturity over time, as opposed to doing just the technology on those projects that were doing AWP or some component of AWP, because it comes back to those shared resources across multiple projects that introduces some barriers there. Another kind of key takeaway here is you want to select technology that's designed to play well with others. If you want to be in a digitalized environment, to have a digital transformation, you need to have vendors that are willing to play nice together. The idea that vendors can sort of hide their data or try to wall off their data and say the only way to work with this is to be inside of our tool, right? That kind of approach is circling the drain, and technology providers that cling to that aren't going to be part of the solutions of the future. That's just not the way that the industry is going. And then AWP is a journey, and digitalized tools enable that journey. So AWP is something that will be increased. The maturity of that will be increased incrementally over time, whether you're talking about whether you're talking about an organization or you're talking about a portfolio of projects. But these digitalized tools really enable that journey and enable you to get the automation and the downstream efficiency, the execution efficiency that's necessary to really realize the benefits. AWP gives you this better planning, but if you don't connect that better planning with facilitated execution, you just don't see the full results. So with that, that's the end of our scheduled. We're going to get to our questions here in just a second. But if you would like to learn more, there's a couple of resources you can go to. You can download some case studies. If you go to www.o3.solutions, we have webinars. This webinar will be posted there. You can watch overviews of our solutions. We have a lot of videos, AWP and O3 and 3, a lot of different videos you can get access to. Follow us on social media. And also we do a monthly newsletter that does a lot of industry wrap up. That's really powerful. And in addition, if you are attending the AWP conference Europe in 2 weeks, I think that's April 4th and 5th, we will be there presenting in London as well. With that, I would like to turn it over to Tori and see if we have any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Josh. We've got a few questions here. And just a reminder, if we don't get to your question, please follow up. You can either email us or, again, as Josh mentioned, contact us through our website, and we will gladly get back to you as soon as we can. So first question, what are other potential pitfalls to avoid when rolling out scalable AWP at a portfolio of small cap projects?
So one thing to keep in mind, this isn't universally true, but it has been our experience that with small cap projects and brownfield projects in general, you tend to have a lower maturity of engineering model attribution. So in order to gain some of the automation associated with that, now there's lots of automation you can get throughout that doesn't require that, but this is just one that we have found. We tend to see a lower level of engineering model attribution maturity. So there's even more need for data requirements than a need to work with the engineering contractors on small cap projects typically. And then I'd say in general, this isn't specific to small cap, but the most important thing when you're talking about rolling out a new process or technology is the leadership's desire to embrace change. So getting a project manager that understands that the status quo is not good enough and wants to set the standard for delivery, having that type of person who understands that change is required for improvement is critical. So I think selection of the project manager for your initial rollout is really important.
Okay. Next question. Is O3 a replacement for a document management system?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. The short answer to that is no. We integrate with document management systems on pretty much on every project, but we come out of the box integrated with the Autodesk BIM 360 Docs solution, which we use for capturing and loading model data. But we also integrate with any number of in-house solutions as well as commercial off-the-shelf document management solutions. Where O3 adds a lot of value is when you have, I have one particular case study I'm thinking about where there's multiple organizations, owner, EPC, and contractor, where they have their own document management systems, and there's this process of reviewing various documents. And what's happening is instead of having that be passed around in a document-centric way, that is then consumed once into a document management system that's integrated into O3. Then they can view those documents in O3, they can review them, annotate them, create constraints and approvals. All of that work in progress activity where there's lots of actions that need to be managed, O3 does that really well. And then once the final document is done and approved, that lives in the document management system and is managed through that document management system. But that review process, O3 does that really well because it's tightly coupled with these other actions and activities, and it's seen as predecessor constraints to various activities, so it connects all that together really well.
Okay, one more. How does O3 integrate with the various tools such as RFI Management Solutions?
Yeah, so our preferred way of integration is through our bidirectional RESTful APIs. We are a modern solution, so our own user interface uses our own API. So what that means is all the data in O3 can be moved in and out of O3 through those APIs. So there's no limitation. It's not, our API is not an afterthought or some subset of our data or functionality covered by that. It's all of the solution. As is the case for modern applications in general. But if the other solution isn't sufficiently sophisticated to support a bidirectional RESTful API integration, then we can do it through webhooks or we can do it through import-export process. We've built a lot of data management functionality into the tool to enable us to easily consume data from other systems. So if that system can export to a comma separated file or Excel or something like that, then we can consume that in. And in that process of consuming it, we can do that via a template, which then does whatever transformations and logic and to that data in order to get it into O3, and that can be saved as a template that then allows you to pull that in on a recurring basis. So there's a lot of functionality we built in around O3 understanding what data needs to be consumed into O3 and in what fields, what format, what frequency, and then whether or not that's actually happening. So it manages the data requirements, it manages the data expectations, it manages the actual data receiving of that data, and it also manages the health of that data management process. So all of that is standard functionality within O3 because needing that accurate data is a requirement to be a tool like O3.
Great. Okay, so last question. What % of the industry do you believe has begun a digital transformation in earnest?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I talked about this a little bit before. I think it's probably similar to what we saw. I think our results today were kind of 30, roughly a third were leading edge, and roughly a third were being left behind. I think I think that's probably a little bit more positive than what I would say is a general market statement. I would say the leading edge is probably lower than that. That being said, I don't think we have met a super major yet that doesn't have a digital transformation initiative within their organization that is a funded and kind of CEO level visibility initiative. So we definitely see that within all of those organizations. But then as you move out into the longer tail of the market, that you see less of that, which I think is in general the trend that we see, is that technology starts at the large organizations and then moves down to the longer tail, because those large organizations have more resources to put towards the R&D process of evaluating and selecting those kind of technologies and driving those transformations. So I think it's roughly in line with what we saw today in our poll, but probably reality a little bit further behind than what our poll represented today.
All right, excellent. Thank you for all of that information and those answers, Josh. So just as a reminder, you can contact us by emailing us at info@o3.solutions or visit our website, www.o3.solutions. And just a quick date correction, that AWP conference in London is the 5th and 6th. That is going to be in person and virtual. So if you're coming, please stop by our booth and say hey, or we will see you in the virtual booth online. So with that, we will close out, and we appreciate your attendance and time today. And please don't hesitate to follow up. And we hope to see you next month for another webinar. And thanks again, Josh.
Thank you, Tori.